So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. And actually, this is a map that I've not seen in a long while, because this is PELARGIR, and I don't think I've actually shown this one in about a year and a half. So it's certainly been quite a long time since anyone has remembered that this map exists, and it is more or less a siege, although based on the way that the deployment zones have worked in this 3v4, it's going to be more along the lines of a cityscape battle, to be honest with you, as the attackers do get to start within the city, at least on this side of this particular branch of the river, because of course PELARGIR and the city rests within a river delta, so there are several choke points within the city, to be fair, that the defenders are going to be able to take advantage of as well, so it'll be interesting to see how this particular battle goes. But we'll be going through the attackers first of all, as we normally do, and we'll start off with the player who sent me this battle replay, and that's going to be Lalan1230 playing as Rune, and it is a good versus evil siege, I believe. At least all of the good factions are on the defense, and Rune are a pretty well balanced faction in Reforged, as we've seen before. They have options just about anywhere, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none in some ways, although I would say their armor piercing contingent does give them a little bit more mastery over that particular trade. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen, of course, potentially very, very damaging, albeit more awkward to use than something like the Blackhawk Engineer. Certainly not as easy. They need a very clear line of sight, which, to be fair, with the different forms of elevation on PELARGIR, should be possible. The other high-tier skirmisher as well from Rune is on the field today, the Balchoth Sapphire Bladesman. Not only are they very, very strong with their javelins, but also pretty decent in melee. A lot of decent melee skill, a lot of damage, but of course they are also the sort of thing which is liable to be focused down if the defenders are able to hit them. Got some Eastron Hunters here as well, obviously very low tier archers, just there to try and skirmish with the enemy. And then the Eastron Crossmen with the armor upgrade here, just to try and, well, the armor upgrade is there obviously to try and mitigate some of the damage they're likely to take at ranges. Again, the sort of thing that enemies are likely to focus down with how deadly crossbows can be and how lightly armoured they normally are. But the armor upgrade will only go so far with a unit like the Eastron Crossbowmen, but it should still help at the very least. Then we have some Scion Rim. The Scion Rim have been pretty effective in most of the battles I've seen them in recently, honestly, and that doesn't surprise me. There may not be anything too special about them, but they are just a very solid unit all around for what they cost, which is, you know, a decent amount of money, but for what you pay, you do get a decent amount of holding power with them. Nar Rim, so the slightly more damage-oriented of their mid-tier archers. We also have some Gamp Rim here as well, so a nice halberd line, some Carmel Shadow Guard for some shock troops, some Flag Rim on both sides of their line as well. More Shadow Guard over on that side as well. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. They have obviously their throwing daggers and then an awful lot of melee defense as well. Greater than most Elven units, in fact. But obviously they are fragile in other ways. No shields. And also not multiple HP, considering the kind of unit they are. Look, Ennis Rim, so they do also have some lance cavalry they can use potentially to their advantage. There's a bit of a frame drop whenever I look over in that direction, which I'm a little bit concerned about going into the later periods of this fight. Some Eastron Horse Guard over on that side, the Mighty Dragon's Breath Flame Cannon, and then the General's Bodyguard is going to be the Carmel's Chosen. Moving on to his ally over here, which is where the frames seem to be dipping a little bit. We'll see if that makes any sort of impact. We have Silver Banshee, who's going to be playing as Mordor, so some Morannon archers here on the front. Obviously Mordor, when it comes to their skirmishing, they do have some high tier archer options. But for the most part, certainly in the opening phases of most fights, they're going to be relying on sort of the standard orc philosophy of numbers. And that's going to be the case here, but it's always good when you're on the attack to make the defenders waste some of their ammunition. Minas Morgul Chosen in the second line, Sauron's Will in the third, and then the Blackguard of Barad-dûr in the fourth, alongside the Temple Executioners over here with the armor upgrade as well, so a very, very strong unit indeed. This is the main core of their army, and we also include in that the Nazgul and the Temple Guard, actually. There's also Morannon infantry over on this side, and then also several units which are sort of clustered towards the natural walls of the city. Morannon halberds there, and Morannon halberds over on the other side. So a good mix of Mordor's numbers, and then also quite a lot of their specialty units as well. Then we move on to the third attacking army, Fence, playing as Umbar. Umbar, of course, very much more of a quality focus among all of the Evil Men factions. However, we do have some of their more basic units here, Belagire Footmen and Corsair Infantry, and also some Belagire Archers. So perhaps seeing the necessity of going a little bit more numbers heavy in a siege battle like this, where they're going to need to leverage their numbers against the inevitable quality the defenders are going to bring. Adunheim Lancers as well, so within the city I'm not sure how useful the Lancers could be, but you could go right around the back honestly with your Lancers, because there are a lot of ways into PELARGIR. It's a big city to try and defend. More archers. Alcarondas Legion is the core, which is very common for Umbar. Obviously it's a very, very reliable front line to have. Corsair Blackguards throwing their javelins in and then getting into melee. Decent damage, of course. Alcarondas Faithful, Balakath Axe Guard, which, to be fair, for axe units like this, without the armour upgrade, they're not all that heavily armoured, but they do have better skill than most other axe units of this type, which is why I actually like them the most out of that kind of price point. Balakath Shield Bearers, who of course have a shield, they're not as deadly as the Axe Guard in melee by any means, but they're still AP at the very least with those mallets. Balakath Marksmen, very, very good at skirmishing, of course, and then the mighty Harbingers of Castamere are also here as well. Then the final attacking army, way over here, we have the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, played by Clem. So we have some heavy Goblin Halberds on the front, some heavy Goblin Archers and Crossbows over here, so going for a very dual-purpose skirmish line first, skirmishing from long range with their lower end, but still useful in that regard, heavy Goblin Archers, and then later on I imagine we'll see the Crossbows roll up, which are obviously a very good, very useful part of the Misty Mountains roster. The Volks Champions are an interesting one as well, because it will certainly make the defenders think twice if they've got any cavalry here about sallying out. Heavy Goblin Infantry over here as well. Mountaineer at Coast, which for the time being are a very, very efficient line infantry unit for the Misty Mountains to use, because they are, in terms of performance, around the same sort of level as Uruk-hai Infantry, but they cost less than that, so that's very nice for them to have. Black Uruks of the Mountains are also back here as well, which obviously in terms of melee are better, but they lack a shield, and overall are a little bit more easy to focus down from afar. Goblin King's Bodyguard, Blackback Mountain Berserkers, which is actually the General's unit which takes away their ability to hide, and then a couple of units of Trolls back here. The Snow Trolls, which are fast and slightly better in sustained melee, but the Cave Trolls, who have a tighter formation and are able to punch through those lines a little bit more easily. So now we shall move on to the Defenders, and the first of two Elven factions on the field today, we have MSQ2, who's going to be playing as Mirkwood. So over here we have some Hiri Peng with the armour upgrade. It's nice to see the Mirkwood armour upgrades, to be honest with you. This is a kind of model that you'll see in the Elves of Assyriand in Silmarillion Total War as well, and I really like it actually. I think it suits Mirkwood as well. So the Hiri Peng are over here getting ready to shoot at the Misty Mountains as they move forward. Obviously numbers are very much going to be a concern for Mirkwood here, but quality, they should be able to rip and tear their way through any army here, which isn't Umbar really, if Umbar decide to go all in all at once. Elder Council as well, Javelin's obviously going to be very useful for a defender. More Hiri Peng with the armour upgrade. Back over here we also have some Ents, we have some Hiri Ek which don't have the armour upgrade, but then of course they have that nice shield, and also they're more designed to be a front line anyway. The Hiri Alt do have the armour upgrade. The Hiri Lung, obviously with their armour upgrade, it will make them slightly better against arrows, albeit it's still not something they'll be good against. Back over here we have the armour upgrade as well on the Elven King's Palace Guard, which makes them even more terrifying than they already are, an absolute monster of a unit, similar to the Temple Executioners on the other side. Some Hiri Alth over here, again armour upgrade, and then the mighty Sindar of the Girdle, which, as I've said before, are a very difficult cavalry unit to stop if you are unprepared to deal with them. But as soon as their hit points are expended, they are a little bit more fragile perhaps than several other units. I think maybe the frame drops might have something to do with this blob. We have Moskov, who's going to be playing as Dol Amroth, so we're just going to have to sort of take a cursory glance over this army composition, because this is the deployment zone for Dol Amroth was quite literally just a little square that he could only use, so he'll have to move quite quickly. Got a catapult though, which is a good choice. Ethelond Halberdiers are in there, there's some Haven Guard, Wanderers of Nimrodal, nice to see those Rangers. He does have some Haven Knights as well. They could be used pretty nicely defensively to prevent any attacking cavalry from outflanking him. But he does need to be careful. If he goes on the offensive with them, could get pretty messy for them. There's some Perithal Champions in there. There's some Ethelond Man-at-Arms. There's some Belfalas Marines. I would imagine in there somewhere there's probably some Black Swan Vanguard as well, because I imagine he probably has the money to bring them. Although I'm not actually so sure looking at this. I can see some dismounted Knights of the Silver Swan though. Anyway, pretty good unit, pretty good army I should say, that Dol Amroth can bring when they have the money to. One of the problems they do run into a little bit is the fact their cavalry is so expensive they often skimp on their infantry when funds are even, but that's not such a problem when they're on the defence in a siege. Speaking of which, one faction which most certainly benefits from having an awful lot of funds to play with are Imladris, played here by Belgium Hunter 9. He's gone for some upgraded Imladris Guardians as well as some Broynin River Wards, a very, very strong combined front line. And then just over here we have some Archers of Rivendell, some Noritino Warriors, some Elder Enway Archers, as well as some God Helim Einauer. Swords of Rivendell as well with the armour upgrade, some Gwythi Myrdain and Gwythi Arthand, as well as a couple of units of Imladris Sentries. And then over here in the northern part of the settlement, over on this side of the river delta, we have some Elder Runway, some Swordmasters, and then a couple of units of Spearmen as well. So no cavalry actually from Ladris, so there's going to be very little in the way of sallying out, I think, with only a unit of Sindar the Girdle and Haven Knights. As strong as those two units are, it's going to be quite difficult for them to make an impact all on their own, especially seeing as in Ladris were the ones with more direct access to the more open ground outside the city. But I will make a little bit of a cut here because I think it is going to take a little bit of time, and I think the attackers will probably allow Dol Amroth to move into a better position because of the deployment zones, but even if they don't, it's still going to take the attackers a little while to sort of march their way into the settlement and start laying siege to this side of the river. So a cut it will be, and I'll rejoin when the battle is joined. So it would appear that first and foremost Mordor are going to be overextending themselves just a little bit here, and MSQ2 is going to be right on hand to take full advantage of the fact that the Morannon infantry are the ones leading the way rather than any sort of spears or halberds, and of course with the Sindar of the Girdle they're going to be able to get a nice charge off. But the silver lining to this of course is the fact that Umbar have got their archers in a pretty decent position just in behind here, and will be able to return some fire. The multiple hit points will be able to save the Sindar of the Girdle from losing any unit models for the time being, I think. But that will change with continued charges. But for the time being, I would say that was worth it because they didn't lose any unit models, and it just gives the attackers something a little bit more to think about as they press further within the settlement. And it is also worth saying as well that there was a little bit of a crash once again in between the points where I was in between the deployment phase and this. But hopefully, based on the fact that I'm now running the game using the batch file directly, that maybe won't happen. We'll see. I'll still have to be on the lookout for rangers working their black magic, but you can see that the defenders have actually fallen back. They've decided not to try and defend the initial river, which I think is probably wise because they would find themselves overwhelmed pretty quickly. I think there'd be far too many places for them to try and cover. So instead, both Mirkwood and Dol Amroth are going to be defending this section of the city from the front, of which there is only one real way up from this angle, and it is up a hill as well, so all of the defending archers, the defending artillery will be in a pretty good position, as well as the defending javelins. But I would also suggest that means we're going to be seeing a little bit more. I think the more decisive battle, shall we say, is probably going to come from over here, in Ladris' station, because if the attackers are wise, they won't funnel 3 of their armies into that one narrow choke point. They will instead try to send at least 2 of their armies around this way, while just sort of skirmishing over a long period of time with the defenders there, trying to send 2 armies to deal with a dug-in Ladris position. But interestingly enough, I think that one charge was all that we're going to see for the time being. But I will actually make another little cut here, because I think it's quite obvious that the attackers are going to take their time getting into position to genuinely assault these defending positions. So moving over this way, it seems as though Mordor are going to be the ones to go over here alongside Rune, who have taken the long way around the outer edge of the city wall. So it's going to be Mordor and Rune taking on this sort of flanking defensive position, whereas Umbar and the Misty Mountains are going to try and go right through the middle of that nice defensive position they've set up there. There's some flickering on these buildings, which is kind of weird, sort of a mix of the wooden walls and stone walls. But I think Ladris probably fancy their chances at holding out for a decent amount of time, honestly, against both of these armies. But Mordor and Rune certainly have some pretty good interplay with one another. Rune have the more standardised quality across their entire army, I would say. Whereas Mordor, obviously, they have that split between their really high tier units and their basic units. Having said that, you know, units like the Nazgul in and amongst Flag Rim, backed up by that Dragon's Breath, could be a winning combination. And also Mirkwood have sent across a few reinforcements as well. Noratino warriors here, getting an opportunity to shoot at Mordor as they cross the street, getting some hits there on the Morannon archers. Obviously in a skirmish fight, something like the Morannon archers doesn't really stand too much of a chance against the Noratino warriors, especially when the Noratino warriors can get several volleys off before the Morannon can even get into range. But Mordor are going to engage from afar, and this is one thing that the attackers can do. Obviously, with the amount of forces they have at their disposal, they have the ability to burn through manpower like this more readily than the defenders do. And let's not forget as well, Rune have got their fair share of archers as well, which they can use over on this side, and in the end, Ladris will find themselves getting outlasted in a skirmish fight, I think. But at least the initial engagements are going to be going against the Morannon archers here, as they try and trade blows with the Noratino warriors. Sindar the Girdle were going to try and get some hits off over here, nearby these graveyards. But this time Mordor has certainly learnt their lesson, because the Morannon halberds are on the front line this time, and the Sindar the Girdle, so certainly don't want to be charging unthinkingly into a line of prepared halberdiers. What have we here? Still, yeah, you can see these Morannon archers taking an awful lot of damage. There is also another unit of archers just in behind there. Morannon infantry going to be charging forward as well, so Mordor certainly not backwards and coming forwards here. They're getting stuck in, and that means I think Rune are honestly going to have to get a bit of a shift on here. They're lagging a little bit further behind Mordor, and taking a little bit too much time perhaps for their allies' liking. So the Morannon infantry are going to get into position here over on this side of the river. You can also see that the Heerdiauth from Mirkwood MSQ2 sensing the opportunity here to feast upon some of these lower end Orc infantry units, and obviously in a battle of line infantry this is a very one-sided affair. The upgraded Mirkwood infantry units up against the bread and butter of Mordor's army. There's only one way that this particular battle is going to end, especially with the close range support there of the Imladris skirmishers as well, albeit the Norotino warriors are starting to take a few losses at the hands of the Morannon archers, and actually I think Imladris, yeah, they are losing their bottle a little bit here and are going to retreat. I think perhaps they feel the noose tightening as they can see Rune spreading out wide with some of their units, but honestly there's no real need for them to retreat in this manner. And the God Helem is still here, so I mean you really don't want your God Helem getting focused down, albeit with their multiple hit points and their very nice armour with the upgrades. They shouldn't have too much to worry about, but I mean, these high quality ammunition here that is being used on only basic units, really. Questionable at best. Meanwhile, over here, you can see heavy Goblin halberdiers moving into position. The upgraded Adora and Ernil archers up here on the high ground. Already you can see there is some archer action happening. Balaketh marksmen firing in, but firing into the front of upgraded Ethelon men-at-arms with their plate armour and those nice shields. The Dol Amroth men-at-arms should be fairly well suited, honestly. The Balaketh marksman's strength comes in their own defensive abilities, not in their damage. So a unit like this is going to be able to absorb quite a lot of arrows from them. And also the heavy Goblin halberdiers are leading the way, which is a very nice target, honestly, for the Dor and Ernil archers to go after. Unshielded. The armour of even the heavier goblins is not particularly fantastic, and you can see here that this is certainly not an advisable move, because heavy Goblin halberds could be a very useful tool later on with that phalanx and with the armour piercing against the Dol Amroth infantry. But like this, they're essentially just being fed into a wood chipper here, and the Dol Amroth archers will be all too happy to continue skirmishing them down like that. But yeah, Dol Amroth looking very comfortable at the moment, and Mirkwood here are playing the role of the support faction, I think, giving aid to Imladris or Dol Amroth as and when they need it. Speaking of which, there's a more genuine assault going on over here, getting stuck into melee fairly early on. That one unit of infantry was very quickly dealt with by the Heerdiauth, but there are more orcs where they came from, and you can see here that the Morannon halberds are now on the front line. Defeat is a distinct possibility, but honestly, once that phalanx gets down, the Heerdiauth may very well start to struggle without any kind of reinforcements. Now, the Broinin River wards are right here, and honestly, they may very well be needed. One of the real weaknesses of Mirkwood is if they get engaged in melee by phalanx units, they can struggle a bit because they don't have any of their own to answer them with. Often, obviously, the main way that Mirkwood tend to deal with that is in their very extensive archer line and shooting phalanx units up before they ever get into melee, but that's not the case over here because they would have been relying on Imladris to do that for them, and Imladris' archers have taken cover behind some of these buildings. The Heerdiauth, yeah, they are, defeat seems certain now. They obviously already have taken a few losses from the archers, and they didn't escape completely unscathed from the Morannon infantry, even if it was a very one-sided affair. But now, taking some damage, and here the Broinin River wards, just sort of standing here and taking these arrows. Not exactly the best idea. Even as heavily armoured as Imladris tend to be among the elves, they are still unshielded, and it's free value for the Morannon archers, considering how poorly their particular engagement started. Mordor will be all too happy to make some value back, and the Broinin River wards, now they're charging in, which is good to see. They really should have done this sooner, and this should be enough to fairly comfortably give the advantage firmly back to the elves in melee. And that might be enough, honestly, to break the Mordor front line. Good to see. Norotino warriors coming back out again, skirmishing with Mordor. And honestly, the fact that Imladris did sort of run away from that fight and lose their bottle did surrender the initiative to Mordor. And now Imladris, they have to be the ones to try and claim that back. The Norotino warriors are taking damage here. And honestly, now, only one unit of Norotino warriors is not going to be enough against the two, albeit depleted, Morannon archers. And there's also the runic Eastron hunters moving forward as well, so the low tier tide of archers is not going to show any signs of abating over on this front, but that's kind of part and parcel of being on the defence. You need to know how best to balance your ranged units, because oftentimes, of course, in a battle like this, you can live and die based on how well you used your ranged units. It's very rare that you see outnumbered defenders win based solely on the strength of their melee units alone. It can happen, but it's rare. Heavy Goblin Halberds, having taken a ton of damage from those Dol Amroth archers, now the Ethelond men-at-arms have closed into melee to finish them off. You know, this could have been a fairly efficient fight for the Heavy Goblin Halberds to take had they been a full unit, but as it is, they're so depleted that these Dol Amroth men-at-arms should be all too comfortable in dealing with this disorganised rabble of goblins that are left before them. Dol Amroth will be all too happy with how this fight has started for them. There's some Heavy Goblin archers that have sort of moved into position over here. There are the Volks Champions. I mean, certainly on this engagement, the Misty Mountains should be the ones to go first, try and take the sting out of Dol Amroth's defence, and then later on commit most of the Umbar army forwards, and then their quality should be enough to carry them all the way through the defenders. But we'll see. Quite a few dead Dol Amroth troops there as well, so they haven't escaped completely unscathed from that particular fight either. Meanwhile, Sindar of the Girdle are over here, thinking about moving forward. I mean, this is a very bold move indeed. What was left of the Hiri Alth and the Broinin River Wards charged forward, but yeah, with all of the Orc reinforcements nearby, that was never going to go too well. I think the Morannon archers might be out of ammunition, also being committed to melee, just more meat for the grinder. Honestly, against the Morannon units, the Broinin River Wards might be able to fight their way through all of this mess, but the kicker really comes in the fact that Mordor do have a unit of more genuine quality on the front line in the Sauron's Will. That AP is going to be very useful. So, again, maybe not as ideal as either side would like, honestly. Charging forward into this mess is the sort of thing the attackers would be hoping to deal with quite quickly, but just by the very nature of how good Imladris are in melee, that's rarely going to happen. But also, by the same token, Imladris may have been hoping that the Sauron's Will weren't willing to commit themselves forward like this. They are getting shot, though, quite nicely there by the Hiri Peng, and also the God Helim are shooting into these archers back here. I mean, the God Helim's ammunition, I think, is a little bit too valuable to be using on Eastron hunters, so I don't think the attackers will mind too much, but it does at least give them something to think about. Like, the defenders are not being too passive here. They are at least engaging and not just allowing the attackers to dictate the entirety of the pace of the battle, over on this side anyway. And the Morannon Halberds trying to push forward, trying to use that phalanx to good effect. The AP will actually be useful against these Broinin River Wards as well, as the Elven Swordsmen continue to try and hold the line, but it's a very thin line now, and Mordor, it's only a matter of time before, with brute strength, they manage to cut their way through. Having a little bit further look northward in the settlement, you can see that the Nar Rim are starting to skirmish. It's going to be completely up to Rune, I think, further north in the settlement to try and make something happen. The Nar Rim, obviously, their fire arrows are entirely cosmetic, but they are going to be skirmishing with the Archers of Rivendell. Now, the Archers of Rivendell, again, are one of those examples of lower-end Imladris units that are more akin to something from Linden. They're very lightly armoured. Having said that, they're still Elven Archers, so I don't know. I think I'd still give the edge to the Nar Rim in a skirmish fight between these two if they manage to get... But the Nar Rim are moving far too close here, and they're allowing the Archers of Rivendell too many free volleys, which will, again, surrender the advantage back to Imladris. Imladris sentries are also over here going to be taking cover behind these rather large buildings, and they'll be ready to engage Rune, which, of course, Rune won't be too pleased to see those high-tier Elven pikemen. Meanwhile, what have we got going on over here? Something's managed to make its way all the way through here. What is that? Some heavy goblins that were obviously routing through the lines, I guess. This is something that I missed. There's one Ent over here. Where'd the rest of the Ents go then? The rest of them must have retreated somewhere, and this one's still just sort of stuck in melee. I mean, to be fair, these Ethelon men-at-arms have managed to finish off that one unit of heavy Goblin Halberdiers, and now, with the help of that one Ent, they're going to be able to do the same to a unit of Corsair infantry as well. So, some decent kills on this one unit of basic infantry for Dol Amroth, which is a good start for them, but of course, you know, they're living a charmed existence at this point, because if this next unit of Halberdiers also moved forward in phalanx, I would imagine that they would, that would be the end of them. They're already shaken because of how depleted they are, so not too much longer for this Dol Amroth front line, I fear, before they are ultimately put to the sword. Some PELARGIR footmen moving forward as well, so Umbar also willing to move forward. Heavy Goblin archers continuing to also, well, the first we've seen of them really putting pressure onto this defensive position up here on the hill. And I think they are trying to skirmish with the upgraded Doran Ernil archers. Again, basic human archers like this with an armour upgrade are often pretty good in a skirmish fight, but if they're just sort of sitting there absorbing ammunition, it's maybe not so ideal for them. And that's going to be the end of them, of course. The Ethelon men-at-arms are about to be overwhelmed with that one Ent now finally moving back to the rest of his unit. Over here, meanwhile, you can see that the Morannon are moving forward. What is going on here? Imladris have got a little detachment of Imladris Guardians over here. The Sauron's Will charged in, but the Sauron's Will, after taking all of those arrows, are in no fit state to be facing these Elven warriors. But these Imladris Guardians are pretty much cut off. They could be utterly overwhelmed if they're not careful. Meanwhile, these Hiripeng, those fire arrows pouring in. I don't think, with how many units there are in support over here, I think the Scion Rim also buffed the morale of nearby units, if I'm not mistaken, for Rune. I don't think the fire arrows are going to cause any breaking, at least not. They managed to break off the depleted units that were charging towards them, to be fair, so it was worthwhile, but obviously you want to be switching back to regular fire once you've managed to achieve the desired effects. Minas Morgul Chosen, Loke Flag Rim and Scion Rim. This is a big push. There's some quality units from both Rune and Mordor pushing forward, and Imladris are going to have to respond to this. The God Helene are shooting in, but some of those shots are hitting the fence and the building. Some of them are finding their mark, but Minas Morgul Chosen, good armour, shielded. Maybe not the best target to be going after. Support is on the way forward. Good to see that Mordor are charging in, but this is a serious collection of Imladris units they're going to have to try and batter their way through. Gwaithie Artham, but perhaps more worryingly for Rune and Mordor, the Gwaithie Myrdain are here, and that AP damage is going to be pretty lethal, especially against the heavily armoured spears from Mordor. Those big elven hammers going to be able to crack through that dark steel. Meanwhile, Nazgul are moving in over here, so this is going to be the end of the Imladris Guardians. They find themselves, although maybe this is a blessing in disguise, because these Nazgul have got their backs exposed to all of those archers, and it'll take quite a while for the arrows to have a genuine impact on the Nazgul because of the extreme amount of HP they have. But I think it's worth it, honestly, to make sure the Nazgul can't get in, sort of, into a blob and doing their thing. It's a big loss, potentially. Temple Guard are here. Sauron's Will also moving forward again with those big serrated axes. Eastron Hunters are still over here as well. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, so maybe going to try and push through here. And honestly, I think a mass push is exactly what is called for here, because I think in Imladris they vastly underestimated the resolve of the attackers here. I think they were hoping to just have a thin line and have that be the end of it. It's not going to work out that way. They needed far, far more men on this front line. I can understand their reservation to an extent, because if they move all their units over here, Rune will push in from the north as well, but they don't have a choice. Like, if they continue not to commit reinforcements, which they are now, Broinin, Riverwater moving in, both units of Imladris sentries, but at what cost? I mean, they definitely need to stem this tide quickly, and I think they have managed to at least do so temporarily, but I think now, honestly, the onus is on Mirkwood. Mirkwood need to be the ones. They're the ones performing the supporting role between the two front lines of Dol Amroth and Imladris. Mirkwood need to be the ones to send over more men down here, because if they don't, they're in danger of being overrun. And I think Mirkwood are going to do just that. There's some Woodland Round Patrol making their way down here now as well. Mirkwood are certainly doing a better job of reinforcing Dol Amroth. These attacks from the Misty Mountains and Umbar have been far more limp-wristed than the ones on the other side, but I think that's fine. Like I said, if I were... Oh, there's actually some Imladris units over here as well, some Elder Enway archers, hoping to get in on the action. Like I said, though, I think the Misty Mountains and Umbar, they do just need to bide their time. Just send low-tier units in to engage, use their archers to try and wear them down, because I do feel as though the better opportunity for the attackers lies on the other side, and then in the late game, when the other defences fall, and that's when you commit everything forwards. I think that's how they should play it, but the Belfalas Marines throwing their javelins in. I think they're throwing them against heavy Goblin archers. That's one thing that I have noticed so far throughout this battle, is the defenders have been far too eager to use their skirmishers on units which are sort of not worth the ammunition. Like, you shouldn't be using javelins on heavy Goblin archers, you shouldn't be using God Helene on a unit of Eastron Hunters. It's just not an efficient thing to do. We'll see if they end up ruining that. Meanwhile, I think here, I think Imladris, once again, they've lost their bottle here, and I think they are going to retreat all of their defending forces to that central island in the river delta to try and just defend that, consolidate their defences, but of course in doing so they're going to have to leave some units behind to be the rear guard, and they will just be utterly overwhelmed by this joint Orc Easterling assault. And I have to say, I think Mordor and Rune so far have played this very well. I think Imladris have maybe not been as brave as they could have been, charging there from the Sindar of the Girdle, but it's a risky business to do this, because if their charge goes too far, they'll find themselves met by spears and halberds. And even the Sindar of the Girdle won't like being in melee with them. Hiri Peng being skirmished down by Temple Guard, I think, which is, again, if you have an opportunity to use these AP arrows to good effect, why not? The momentum is with you at this point. I think maybe the only criticism I would have is that Rune have maybe been a little bit slow on the uptake to take advantage of the huge hole that's in the defence over here now. But to be fair, they are moving there, just maybe not as quickly as they could have done. And it's a very minor note as well, because I think Rune and Mordor do deserve a lot of credit for how they dealt with this Imladris position over here. And now with the Blackguard crushing through the front line, they're going to be able to overwhelm the river wards. And now the last unit of infantry that's on the front line are these Imladris Guardians, and they aren't going to last too much longer either. Imladris are strong, but they're not so strong that individual units of infantry can hold back entire sections of an army like this. Sindar the Girdle is still here. The Woodland Realm Patrol trying to make good use here of the Imladris units holding on for as long as possible, but a lot of their arrows are just being ballooned up into the air, so not a good choice of target. And also Mordor are now punching through. They're going to be able to get into there with them in a small ball chosen. And it's about time that Mirkwood tried to get these archers out of here. Sindar of the Girdle charging in. It's brave of them to do that, because those are spears. They did make them shaken, to be fair, but they don't really have the ability to break them fully, I don't think, especially not with this many reinforcements nearby. Sauron's Will are also here after all. And as if that wasn't enough, Mirkwood are not going to be able to save these well, ooh, they're going to break, I think. They got a little bit greedier. They got too greedy. He should have retreated them far sooner than that. But in the end, he stayed there too long, and now he's going to pay the price. That entire unit of Woodland Realm Patrol, which still had ammunition, is going to be dealt with. To be fair to the Imladris Guardians, victory was a distinct possibility for a little while there. It's obviously not going to maintain those odds, but it does go to show how strong the Imladris infantry is, that they've been able to hold on in a fight that they were so horribly outmatched in, and yet they were still able to hold on for dear life, which is a credit to them, I would say. Meanwhile, over here on this side, things are a little bit rosier for the defenders. Dol Amroth still holding on, still doing so in an efficient manner. The Ents at this point are actually very depleted though, and it's another example of maybe the defenders using... I know I'm sort of being a bit of a hypocrite here. I have said in the past that people tend to try and save all of their elite units for too late in the game, but I think the defenders here have been guilty of doing the exact opposite. They've been dumping too much of their high tier stuff into the attacking tar pits, essentially. What are they going to do later on when the attackers come forward with like Blackbacks and Harbingers and a lot more Alcarondas Legion that are on the front line at the moment? The question has to be asked. Like, there's no universe in which using javelins on heavy goblin archers that are out of ammunition. There's no situation in which that is the right thing to do. What have we got here? The Hiri Peng in a bit of an interesting position over here, but to be honest with you, they definitely don't have an angle. I'm not really sure what's happening here, unless they can shoot through these houses. No, they can't. So they're shooting right over the top. Again, it's wasteful, and all of these things together make me believe, like, the attackers, when they outnumber the defenders, always have a bit of an advantage, I think. Like, they go into the battle as the favourites 9 times out of 10, depending on the map, of course. And in this case, with all of the ways in, with how wasteful the defenders have been with some of their stuff so far, I would say certainly that the attackers should go into the second phase of this battle as the clear favourites, I think. The forces of evil may very well conquer PELARGIR today. This is interesting though. The Gwaithir Myrdain with their dark armour, I didn't even realise there was this many of them still alive. And victory seems certain for them. Like, I think maybe the attackers are a little bit guilty of just hoping that they can kill off the Gwaithir Myrdain with only a small amount of units. Fortunately, the Gamp Brim are coming in to lend a hand with their phalanx, because You can't just send any old rubbish at the Gwaithir Myrdain and expect to be successful. They are one of the most devastating units of shock infantry in the game. And just Scion Rim and Flag Rim would not have been sufficient, but now I think through sheer numbers they're going to just try and overwhelm the Gwaithir Myrdain, which is the way I would do it as well. It's very difficult to go quality to quality with Imladris after all. Yeah, this is a little bit more like it. Right thing to do from Rune, just overwhelm them. Victory still seems certain for them. 20 Gwaithir Myrdain against a horde of angry Easterlings, and yet the elves still fancy their chances. Again, it just goes to show how strong this unit really is, and I don't think actually the Gwaithir Myrdain, I've really shown it sort of in the best of light. Best of lights is maybe the wrong word. I don't think we've really seen the best of the Gwaithir Myrdain in 0.97, to be honest with you. And 0.97's been out for several months at this point. But they are strong. There go the Nazgul as well. So yeah, this is most certainly the end of this pocket of elven resistance, and this will allow Mordor and Rune to regroup their armies and get ready to march over on this side of the settlement as well. They will have to go uphill this time, and Mirkwood's position will probably be better considered than the Imladris one before it. Still, they've lost a lot so far, the defenders. The attackers can afford to take more losses. Dismounted Knights to Silver Swan coming down here. This, I think, is an elite committal, which I'm a little bit more on board with from the defenders, because they are a strong unit in this situation. They're actually better when they have a bit of support, because they're not the biggest unit, and they buff nearby morale as well. So it would help keep one of Dol Amroth's lower end units in melee as well, while giving them a bit of support. And that, I think, would be a good front line. I mean, the heavy goblin infantry is broken and fighting to the death. At least one unit is, the other unit probably not too far behind. And obviously these basic heavy goblins are going to be no match for these knights from Dol Amroth. But so far, so good for Dol Amroth. Maybe a little bit wasteful with some of the heavy goblin crossbows. They need to be a little bit more careful than this. They need to get out of melee. They still have ammunition. And those bolts are going to be very key for the Misty Mountains if they want to really hammer home the attacker's dominance so far. You can see those arrows whizzing by in the background. A combination of Mirkwood and Dol Amroth archers firing away and actually really just ripping through that unit of crossbows here. A good catch. Absolutely the right thing to go for. Denying the attackers their crossbows in the late game will be the sort of thing which maybe will have the defenders on the road to recovery. We all know how effective crossbows can be. And again, that very natty and spiky goblin armour is not going to be sufficient to deal with the arrows from the kingdoms of men and elves. Still the Volks Champions. I'm not sure how useful the Volks Champions are really going to be. Maybe they can just use them to cause some havoc. Some reinforcements back here. I mean, the army does extend all the way back here, which is the worrying thing for the defenders. Like the defenders, they can surely feel the noose tightening now. They do still have a lot of reinforcements up here, to be fair, but I mean, you always get a sense of what way the wind is blowing in a battle. And again, with yet more wasteful wasted arrows really just being shot right up into the air, not really doing a great deal of anything. It's not good signs, this, for the defenders moving forwards, I don't think. We are actually sort of past the halfway point in the battle, though, so just taking a little bit of stock here. You can see that, I mean, technically speaking, the defenders are much the better in terms of percentage of kills so far, but again, I don't buy it. Like, later on in these battles, oftentimes, you will see the attackers sort of start roaring into the lead, and I feel as though that's going to be the case here as well. I could be wrong. Like the defenders, there are many ways in which the defenders could salvage this situation. There are many ways in which the attackers could make this go sour for themselves. But, I don't know. Meanwhile, Dismounted Knights to Silver Swan Terror, and that's the heavy goblin crossbows that still had ammunition being fed into the Dismounted Knights to Silver Swan. Not good for the Misty Mountains. I mean, to be fair, the Misty Mountains player has not had the best of games so far. And Dol Amroth has easily been able to hold the line far more efficiently than Imladris was able to over on the other side. Having a look over here, the regrouping continues. This is also a tool that the defenders will be very concerned about, I'm sure. The Dragon's Breath is very, very potent. Temple Guard over here as well, though they probably used up most of their ammunition. Armor-piercing archers, I should say, don't have the most arrows in their quiver. And you know, they were already firing into a unit of Hiri Pang, which, to be fair, gave them the momentum to push this far already. But they do need to be careful here, the attacks. If they charge in unthinkingly again into a more well-prepared defence up on the higher ground over there, they will be torn apart. A lot of runic units back there as well. A little bit too spread out for my liking. Like, they can move forward more of their units. They can more closely group their army at this point, I feel. What's going on over here? Is this a routing unit? Yes, it is. Ethelon Man-at-Arms. I thought maybe that could have been Sindar of the Girdle once again. Not sure how useful that runic cavalry is going to be either. Less useful than the Volks Champions as well. At least the Volks Champions are a little bit tankier. But again, maybe they can cause some havoc. We shall see. A little bit more of a genuine engagement happening over here now. Ooh. Yeah, that bears all the telltale lag spikes of doesn't matter how I run the game. Lag spikes like that happen when there are rangers about. Javelins firing in as well. PELARGIR archers shaken. What have we got on the front line? Hiri Peng are out of ammunition, being committed forwards. The dismounted Knights to Silver Swan at this point are probably fairly depleted, but another unit of upgraded Ethelon Man-at-Arms is also shoring up the line. So more of a genuine assault happening, but honestly I probably would have waited until my allies were ready to attack the back end of this defensive position as well. As it is, the attackers maybe a little bit disjointed at this point, which is exactly the sort of thing the defenders needed, I think, to get back into this. Ooh dear. Really don't want to get too close to that, because I've had enough of crashing in recent times, and there's no way that a blob like that, especially when rangers are about, there's no way that a blob like that yields nice frames. Meanwhile, Minas Morgul's chosen some Norrotino warriors over here who have their melee weapons out, and as I've said before, the Norrotino warriors, probably their main selling point next to the Archers of Rivendell, is the fact that they are actually significantly better in melee. So it's time to earn their keep in those regards. I think I really like the new unit model for the Norrotino warriors as well. I believe it was Dreezy that did that. Meanwhile, Eldaranway archers up on the side. Ooh, hello. Loknar Rim managing to get some good shots off. Those flaming arrows able to hit their mark, killing off yet more high elves. And they're just going to stand here and take it, which surprises me, honestly. The Norrotino warriors, they may be slightly better at dealing with arrows than the Archers of Rivendell, but not that much better. And these are free kills for the Narrim. And every man is going to count for the defenders here. Ooh, hello. Ooh, threading the needle nicely there and hitting the Wanderers of Nimrodel and... ooh, some of the Elven King's Palace Guard as well. Very, very nice. Obviously, the Dragon's Breath is not the most difficult piece of siege equipment to use. It's deadly accurate. And if you have nothing in the way of it, it managed to just crest the top of those buildings there. So, very fortunate in threading the needle, but good kills. And again, it definitely gives the defenders something to think about here. Alright, so after a series of crashes, which didn't even allow me to get back to the point that I was at when it crashed, I've decided to just say, you know what, fuck it, I'm turning off my shaders, I'm turning the graphics right down so it looks like trash, garbage, just to see if we can't make it through this absolute mess. You know, I remember when I actually genuinely enjoyed doing these, and now whenever I see one of these big siege battles, I'm like, for fuck's sake, I'm going to be here for like 4.5 hours trying to crank this one out. And here we go. I mean, we have a melee assault, the Morannon Halberds and the Loke Flag Rim, and the game hasn't shat itself yet, so I'm assuming that we're going to be okay for at least another 2,000 frames. Yeah, I mean, I think I'll talk about this at the end of the battle, provided we ever make it there. Sauron's Will are also pushing through, and we have the Eldaranway archers. Just look at these crisp graphics, like the finest low tier settings from 2006. Only the best for my videos. But yeah, we have the Eldaranway archers now stopping the advance of the Sauron's Will. And the Eldaranway archers, of course, like most heavy elven archers, are going to be pretty good in melee, but not good enough to take on the Nazgul. And I think the Nazgul have actually succeeded in just sort of slipping through here unawares. And the defenders, once again, have been caught with their pants down, really, because they don't really have a good enough defence to deal with this sort of assault. And something is going to have to give here, you would imagine. There's also some dismounted Knights of Silver Swan, which of course are sprite form until we get within 2 meters of them, because of course we are on low settings. Oof. Once again, even that is not going to be good enough to keep the game going in that blob there. The dead bodies certainly not helping matters. fire arrows being sprayed into the Orcs the Misty Mountains position over there. Meanwhile, over on this side of things, we can see that the archers of Rivendell and the God Helym and this unit of Tirithea marksmen getting into position. The Carmel Shadow Guard are a good target for archers to go after, relatively lightly armoured and unshielded, but instead they're going into the backs of the flag room, which, to be fair, not the worst idea either, when you're hitting the backs of them like that. Very nice hit there from the... well, I say very nice hit. More of a grazing hit, if anything, but it did manage to hit the God Helym, so even a grazing hit is going to be enough to deal significant damage to an important unit. A lot of AP here on the front line, which, to be fair, is not the worst thing in the world when you're having to deal with Elder Enway, but the Elder Enway could also fall back on having that Elven defensive skill, which is going to be very nice for them, of course. But with relatively elite Mordor units backed up by Nazgul right in here and in amongst things, as long as they keep sending forces forward here, I fancy the attackers to actually push through here, but of course they do still have to make up. Alright, listen, enough is enough. I really can't handle this anymore. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. Like I said, I genuinely enjoyed doing this once upon a time, but now whenever I see one of those big sieges in Reforged, my heart sinks because I know that this is a possibility of what can happen, and it has happened again. And I think that this is probably the best example of why it isn't just the maps that have been created recently, because PELARGIR is a map that has been in the game for quite some time at this point, and I have done it in the past successfully before without any sort of issues with my current setup, and now it is a nightmare. I cannot finish that battle. I think the game runs like an absolute pig for me now. It is... There was actually a battle before this I did where I descended into a rant like this before, and I decided not to release it because with all the fixes I kind of felt like it would maybe work out okay. And to an extent it has. On battles that are just on relatively normal maps, it's okay. But this to me is kind of the last straw at this point. I don't know how I'm supposed to continue doing this when this is happening. Like, what am I supposed to do? Because clearly at this point it's because so much stuff has been added to the game that it's on its limit, effectively. And it's probably a combination of all my recording software and everything that's running and going on like that. But how am I supposed to make videos without my recording software running? How am I supposed to maintain the quality that I've managed to achieve if I'm turning everything off? And even in some cases, even then, you just saw when I turn everything down to the absolute worst settings in the game, pretty much, except for texture quality, which shouldn't make that much of a big deal anyway when everything turns to sprites from 2 meters away. It's still crashing. How am I supposed to continue doing this if this is what's going to be happening? This is a video which I am going to release because I'd like to know what I'm supposed to do. You know, I do not enjoy doing this anymore. I absolutely that's a bit harsh. I don't despise it, but I don't enjoy this anymore. It's a chore for me because this is what keeps happening. Even to do one battle now, it can take 4 to 5 hours just to record, and that's not even factoring in the rendering or the uploading. How is this worth it for me at this point? What am I supposed to do? Because this is the only thing that people watch my channel for. I'm not daft. I know that people don't come here because they're coming here for me specifically. They're coming here because I do decent content for Third Age Reforged and maybe Silmarillion if people start to enjoy that, which I certainly hope they do, because there's a good chance that Silmarillion will be made to be a little bit more stable than this because of its more grounded nature. With all of the wacky things that have been added to Reforged, the game can't handle it anymore for me. You know, my game is disintegrating whenever I try to make a recording, and there's nothing I can do, really. There is nothing I can do, because these are the sorts of issues which are only really affecting me. But they are affecting me. So, yeah, what am I supposed to do? I'm not spending 5 hours making each battle recording. It doesn't matter how good the battle is. It doesn't matter how close of a large-scale siege it is. I'm not doing it. What am I supposed to do? I'm lost, honestly, because this effectively is sort of, forget like Copper or Article 13 or anything else. This is the problem that my channel has all of a sudden, because without Reforged, my channel dies, and it dies hard, and it's a mess right now. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I've said that several times at this point, but it's, you know, I'm asking for help at this point. I'm genuinely lost with this. You know, and that's pretty much all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, if there is something that comes next.